Welcome to Mission 6, Parent and Child. Sometimes you'll have a variety of images or three-dimensional meshes onto your Blender scene that you want to have interact with each other. In this mission, as your scene gets more complicated and filled with objects, it is efficient to group the objects up. There are a number of ways to group your objects up, but in this mission, we'll be learning how to parent and child objects so that the parent moves the child and they're connected to each other. So let's get to it. Let's scroll down and let's make sure you download a Blender file called Mission 6 Parent and Child. When you open up the Parent and Child Blender file, you'll find a three-dimensional image that looks like this. We'll be focusing most of our energy here on the scene collection window. Right now, what you've noticed is if I move the head, the rest of the body doesn't move. If I move the hand, the rest of the body doesn't move. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that we can select one of these objects or these three-dimensional meshes and let that be the pivot of the whole scene here, so that we can select, for instance, just this one and it'll move the whole thing, just like what I did accidentally here. So let me ungroup that one for now, because that's the head and I want the head to be separate from everything else for now, and we'll learn how to do that. There you go. Alright, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna parent these objects together. So I want the thorax, the chest, and hip area to be the pivot for the whole three-dimensional model. Okay, and so the first step is I want to make sure the head is the child of the thorax, which means that the thorax is going to be controlling the head. So to do that, I am going to press on the head object, press shift on my keyboard, and drag the head object to the thorax. And as you see, these other objects get highlighted with a black outline. And I'm going to go to the thorax and then let go. And what we see here is a symbol here saying that there is a mesh that's connected to the thorax. There's also a left or a caret symbol that's pointing in the rightward direction, and that will open up a hierarchy or a tree of different objects connected to it. So there, the head is connected to the thorax. The thorax is the parent, the head is now the child. Alright, which means that if I move the thorax, the head moves along with it. If I scale the thorax, the head also scales. If I rotate the thorax, the head will also rotate with it, as if it were one object. That provides you with a big advantage right here. Okay, let's group the other ones up. Let's connect the hat to the head. Very similar, hat to the head. Let's connect the hat. Click on the hat, press shift on your keyboard, and drag the hat down to the head object and let go. Now the head will also have this upside down triangle, which means that there is a three-dimensional mesh that's parented to the head, and that's the hat. So it looks like the hat is connected to the head and the head's connected to the thorax, so that if I control the thorax now, the hat is now controlled along. If I control the head will control the hat, but the head does not control the thorax. And as you see these arrows, you see this dotted line, which means there is a connection between the thorax and the head. Very similar to the hat, there's a connection between the hat and the head. This is where the parenting happens right there. Pretty cool. Alright, so let's look at the assignment here. Let's go back to the mission. And under task 2, you're going to assign the following child and parent. The head, both forearms and hips are parented to the thorax. The hat is parented to the head. Both forearms are parented to the upper arms. The hands are parented to the forearms. The legs are parented to the hips. And the feet are parented to the legs. And I'm going to add one more to that later on. But I want you to create another object called a null. So let's find the null object. Or empty, not null. So I'm going to click on, let's say, a cube. And it'll give us a wireframe cube, and I'll show you why this is going to be important later on. This is something that you'll be focusing on when we go into 3D animation, but I just want to make sure that you know ahead of time that this does exist. I'm going to scale I'm going to scale this 3-dimensional cube right here, and then so that it fits this human-like mesh. So let me do that really fast. I'm going to transform it a bit so that it fits it within this box. Let me go to the side and do the same thing here. Alright, now that the human is inside of this box, I'm going to parent all of these objects with this box. So, and I'm going to call this human controller. Okay, and so very similar, I'm going to select all of these objects. And the best way to select all of these objects is pressing Shift, selecting your first object, and then selecting your last object. And it selects everything. And I'm going to click and move into the human controller. Okay, let's do that one more time. Let's select all the objects by clicking on the very first object, pressing Shift, clicking on the very last object on the scene collection list, and then click and dragging all of these objects and placing them in the human controller. As you see, the human controller empty is highlighted, and I'm going to let go. And I'm going to do the same thing to the hip. I forgot to add the hip in. And as you see here, it looks like there are 14 objects that are parented to the human controller. The human controller is very advantageous because we can control one box and it'll control everything about this object here. It will control the rotation, the location, the size, and more. So that's what you're going to be doing in this mission, is learning how to parent and child, and at the end parent a null or an empty to the whole object.